Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and we are now going to be talking about something of great importance to all of us and dear to my heart because I'm a retired professor and I'm an immigrant to Canada, come to think of it. So I guess in a way that's an international educational adventure. But it didn't seem very different when I first came to Canada. And I want to introduce you both to both dear friends of mine who do not know each other but are now getting acquainted. Marianne Larsen comes first because I've known Marianne for, how many years, Marianne? I don't know.
I was just counting, over 40, 42 or 43.
That's amazing because you actually look better than you did then. You were a student of mine. You were sort of a, ordinary, very kind of mousy student. There was nothing special about you, but you started working for me, and then you became special. And as you became a professor, you became extraordinary. So, and still extremely dear to my heart. So, and not quite as long a friendship, but a very good friendship with Leon Kosals, who is a Russian sociologist who used to teach at the the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, which I understand is the best university in Moscow, in Russia. Is that right? Still, you think?
Yeah, I think so in social sciences, but not only now, because they started at the social science university, but now they moved, not now, but several years ago, moved to other areas. So it's
And they're using physics and stuff like that too now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, now the thing that made me think of inviting you, Leon, to talk with Marianne is that I want to talk to Marianne about her special field of expertise, which is the internationalization of education. And I know that by going back and forth from Russia for many years and teaching in both universities, you got a sense of what was going on in both places, but also that you taught sociology students in English. And that kind of thing is something that Marianne knows something about. I thought that was quite interesting. I can't imagine anybody at the University of Toronto teaching a course in Russian. It just wouldn't happen. But Marianne, let's get going. Tell me what you know about this phenomenon.
So thank you, Meta, and thank you for the kind introduction. It's great to be here, and Leon, to meet you as well. I'm going to just go back a little bit in time to sort of help the listeners understand some of the context of international education or internationalization. And I won't spend too much time on the history, but I'm also a historian of education, and I think history is important. And really the beginnings of what we call international education was in the post-World War II period with the development of the UN and then UNESCO. And this idea that through cross-cultural understanding, peace, and learning about one another, we could avoid another war such as the one that we had. And UNESCO was founded in 1945 with the motto that building peace happens in the minds of men and women, and education has a really important role to play there. And so over the course of the decades, you see the development of a lot of multilateral organizations beyond the UN that have a role in education, fostering peace and cross-cultural understanding. Even the World Bank Fulbright program in the US was a very big program that helped to facilitate exchanges among students in the US and other countries, and faculty and academics as well. And then
you made that sound like is past tense. It doesn't exist anymore, or what?
Well, I think that there's been massive cuts in the US to the Fulbright program, and certainly it isn't what it used to be. So that's why I am using the past tense.
Mhm.
But my research really focuses on internationalization or international education in higher education. And when people ask me what that means, there are many definitions, and the one that's usually cited is by Professor Jane Knight. She's at the University of Toronto, and she referred to internationalization as the process of integrating an international or global dimension into basically all the things that happen in higher education: research, teaching, service, and doing that in order to foster cross-cultural understanding, be making global citizens. And then there are a number of ways that can happen, and that includes mobility of students. So that's international students or students going to study abroad, and then faculty mobility. And Leon, perhaps you could talk a little bit about your experience and why you engaged in teaching in different countries and what the value is of that, because there's a lot of research, my own included, that illustrates that these opportunities to study abroad, to go abroad, enhances one's what some people call global competencies and fosters understanding and basically can help to create peace in the world, among many things.
In fact, this internationalization project, it's a kind of education globally. It's a kind of two-sided road. For example, Russia, Canada, or Russia, the US, or Japan, US, and so on and so forth. However, I would say a bit asymmetrical because, for example, it's an idea that you can borrow some advanced methods and advanced organization and so on and so forth. This is an idea, for example, was on the Russian side, and of course, to share maybe some unique characteristics that it's of Russian culture and as well as science, and it's more important to social sciences, of course, because in terms, especially in the Russian case, because in terms of technical sciences, math, and natural sciences, it's not was so big gap between Russia and the West, but in social sciences it was a big gap, and it was an idea to make it international and in Russia, and to include some new theories, new methodologies, new techniques in education, and it was a part of, I would say, a project of democratization, of modernization of the country. It was not just isolated idea to teach some courses in English or in French or in other languages. It was an idea to be a part of the big democratic world and to have all, I would say, advantages. And it was a special policy for that. It was not just activities of research, only research community. It was.
But when it became very strong movement, because I was going to Russia. I used to go to Russia every year, and for many years. But in the 80s, there wasn't any such thing.
Yeah, sure.
Would that have started under the Yeltsin time, or what was it a big sudden policy change that I wasn't aware of? Because I don't think any of us here knew that kind of change was going on in Russia. And was it just in one place? Would it have been just in Moscow, or would have been?
No. It was official state policy, because education in Russia very centralized, as in most civil law countries, especially in the Russian version of civil law, and the government strictly monitor and control what is going on in higher education, as well as other branches of education, and it was adopted a special law, a new law on education, with significant, I would say, changes because it was an idea to provide students with new diploma, new certifications that state certification that can be acceptable in most countries. And of course, it was not just only activities of the research community, because in the research community was a mixed also ideas for mixed attitudes. However, most of them were positive. But before political decision, it was just isolated cases. But state policy started at the end of actually 1990s, and of course after the change in economy and politics.
And I would add to that and this is just, I think, reiterating what you're saying. During the Cold War period, you really see international education and international exchanges being used as a form of soft power among the United States and the Soviet Union. And you see more exchanges from the Soviet Union with the satellite states and other allied nations and vice versa. And there's also at that time an expansion of what is called area studies. So the US, a lot of universities started to have Soviet studies or Middle Eastern studies, and it was about understanding those parts of the world. But during the Cold War, there was particular reasons for U.S. scholars to master Russian and understand, what about the Soviet Union. So that particular period, the Cold War, you see particular manifestations of international education for geopolitical reasons.
Yeah, geopolitical, ideological reason from the Russian, but
ideological, yes.
Soviet side, from both sides, of course, it was some ideological component built in. In this new stage, also it was an ideological component, but it was component of democracy and free market and this kind of stuff that was more or less in line with the idea of democratic society and capitalism, right. This kind of stuff.
Yeah. I just wanted to pick up on another point you made, Leon, and this is written about a lot in the literature with respect to what we call global South countries now engaging in internationalization, that sometimes internationalization is equated with westernization. In other words, as you mentioned, Meta, there are many universities in non-native English-speaking countries that have English as the medium of instruction. It's called EMI. And so students can go to Korea from outside of Korea and get a degree in English. Mm-hmm. And there are other aspects of internationalization that non-Western countries critique because it looks like there's a push to become like the West. And so that's another tension that we see in internationalization.
Well, that's kind of educational imperialism,
Well, is it intentional on the part of Western countries to try to convert other people to our not just our democratic ideology or anything political, but also the content of the research. In other words, what I'm seeing, as far as I know, I don't see Western students reading sociology journals from Russia or China or India or any place. But I do think that those students in those other countries are reading and are familiar with academics in say the social sciences, and now I suppose in the sciences and other fields, that the Western ideology or the Western content of research must be taking priority somehow. Is there a way to equalize that, or is there any effort to try to merge the discourse in various countries as to the content of the courses being taught?
I'm not sure I can answer that question, but I can say that central to everything that we've been talking about are what are called global university ranking systems. So universities around the world are ranked, and there's a couple of key ranking systems. One's called the Times Higher Education, and another is out of Shanghai. And those ranking systems, one of the criteria for being high in the rankings is if your faculty publish in English-speaking journals, and also if they publish in what are called social science or certain citation indices, and these are Western English language publications, and any faculty that want to keep their jobs or get promoted in universities around the world are increasingly doing their research and writing in English in order that they get promoted and that their universities go higher in the rankings, that all the universities around the world all want to be a world-class university. And that is, to me, very problematic because it is valuing certain kinds of knowledge and not valuing others. So if we talk about international education, as you said, Meta, how do we level the playing field and make it so that students in other parts of the world are learning about, name a country, Botswana or Qatar, and what's going on there in terms of their research and scholarship.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, there's always been an interest in having people go traveling or doing, Peace Corps kinds of jobs in other countries as a broadening experience. It's not a formal education, but everybody realizes that having worked in a village in Botswana is going to change one's life perspective, and that it's a very good thing to do. But and I do know some people who have gone to universities, for example, in Ghana, as undergraduates, but just gone there for the sake of a year or two in a foreign country.
I have done a lot of research on what is called international service learning, and that's when a student, for example, a nursing student, might go to Haiti and work there as a volunteer in order to broaden their understanding of working in a cross-cultural setting. And people do that. They go and volunteer as a part of their education or study abroad. And there's a lot of research on the value of that. But my focus on my research is that valuable to the host community, the communities where these primarily white, English-speaking, middle-class students from the West are coming to help them for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. And does that set up a power dimension where you have the person who is the helper doing the service and reinforce these inequalities that exist in the world today? So these kind of experiences can have a good side, but they can also, I could say, it's a part of the darker side of internationalization as well.
Well, I think that's true just even for ordinary tourism. I went to China in 1980, just when they were opening up, and you hadn't been able to go there until then. And I was on a tour, organized tour from, I guess, Hong Kong or something. I was really shocked at how arrogant the tourists were on my group. They were overbearing, rude. I would think nobody would want them to ever come back. I don't know how typical that is, or was that a certain period of time? Does that still happen? I suppose individuals vary, but when you see a whole group of people really behaving very badly, has anybody studied that as the impact of simple, tourism as an educational event and as a geopolitical statement of domineering status?
I'm sure there have been research studies on what kind of attitudes people bring when they travel abroad,
Mhm.
and the impact on the local community. I know about something called voluntourism, and that is when a person might go to an orphanage in Nepal and volunteer as a do-gooder
Mhm.
for a couple of weeks. And again, I think it reinforces these inequalities in societies, and rather than building capacity in a local society to deal with the issues that they may face in their home communities.
Mhm.
But the question of tourism, I think it probably still does happen today, and it really depends on the tourist.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, I meant that it's a kind of asymmetrical road, asymmetrical relationships, and of course, some dark side, but also a bright side too, because in fact, it was a transfer of the new knowledge and new, I would say, method of research and policy making. For example, one of the important issues in social sciences that it's a very big market in for English speaking, I would say, research in countries. I do not remember exactly when, but many years ago, when the number of publications in social sciences in Russia in English exceeds the number in Russian. So
Mhm.
if you want to do research for example, about the motivation of labor, you should not just study in Russia. I mean, you have to know about some international research about that.
Wow.
So,
I
in
didn't.
this sense, it's for especially for research and education as well as policy making, because some people who get this education, they could and they really did that to come back and then to contribute to their home countries. And I saw it in Russia as well, because people in universities and in companies, they hire graduates who had education in Britain or in Canada or in France or in the US, and they did a good job. So, in this sense, yes, it was definitely bright side. And Russia had, I would say, in communities, local communities as well, business, they had some positive contribution, as well as there are some new tensions, as well as some new, I would say, inequalities.
When you first came to Canada and began teaching, what struck you as a big difference, if any, between teaching at a Moscow university and teaching at a university in Toronto, and or teaching? Marianne taught at Western University in London, Ontario. Uh, how different did things seem to you about the culture of academia here, or the way the students behaved, or did you see any disparities, or was it pretty much the same except the language?
No, it was not same. First of all, Canadian universities have a lot of autonomy, and they actually mostly, I would say, govern themselves. But it's not the case of Russia, because it was, I would say, strictly controlled. And there are some, I would say, old Soviet organizational habits. For example, from the very beginning, and it's still the same, and it's heritage from Soviet times, so-called student group. Administration assign students in groups that still same group from the first year to the last year.
Oh,
And they appoint informal leader of the group among students who communicate with administration, and then he or she communicates with students as a kind of mediator between administration and students.
Sort
It's
of
not
like
the
the
case.
foreman's role in a factory or something.
Yeah, 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 the same. It's a very, I would say, well, it's deeply embedded in Soviet style of governance and relationship between people and state.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But it was not the case in Canada. And
And do you see that in other countries? Whether are there many other countries that did things like that? No, I was thinking
I
Marianne.
didn't hear about that outside Soviet Union. Maybe in former Soviet republics. I don't know. Probably they have the
Marianne,
same system.
do you know of other countries that had that way of handling student groups?
My guess is probably China. Don't quote me on that, but I would suspect, given the nature of the bureaucracy and the state system in China, that there would be something similar
Uh-huh.
with higher education there.
Yeah, yeah. It's purely administrative issue. It's nothing related to the real education needs, or I would say some needs of the discipline, this or that. It's just formal administrative relationships.
Right.
Yeah, and it was, I would say, on the one hand, old Soviet heritage. On the other hand, it was, I would say, a product of this centralized control of from the government that's
Yep.
now still in place in Russia. Without this Soviet system, they keep this administrative habit.
Yes, I've
At the
read that.
same time, in some sense, the discussions in Russian auditorium was much more, I would say, straight and tough in compare with Canadian one, less polite, and I would say um,
Really?
without, I would say, any political correctness.
Right.
There was no in these, no, and is not as political. Maybe now they in Russia establish some ideological correctness. I would say probably it's a new. Now it's a new step, but not as in style that we have in Canada, where you should be polite and you should provide some opportunities to express some views and do not use these words and this that word. So in this sense, culture in Canada controlled also provide some, I would say, informal social control based on social norms of society. It's definitely not because of state. It's
Right. And
just
that could be said anywhere, the
yeah,
social norm. Well,
yeah,
role of the
yeah, yeah,
state.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
the I would say source of this, it's not state but society itself. In this sense, yeah, it is a difference
And
between.
I've found in my experience teaching graduate students, international graduate students, primarily from East Asia, that there are cultural norms that are different in terms of engaging in the classroom, engaging with one's professor. Develop the emphasis in my classrooms and many, I think, in the West, are develop to have the students develop critical thinking skills, which may involve debating and discussing, and that. And I don't want to generalize completely, but I have found some of the students that I've taught from China, Korea, Japan, and so on and so forth, a hesitancy to do that because the cultural norms in the countries that they have come from don't encourage that kind of
Well,
engagement in the classroom.
let me get a little bit rude here because I don't like to say this, but I taught a lot of Chinese students when undergraduates who had not been in Canada very long. But I taught a lot of sociology courses where there would be, 50% of the class would be overseas Chinese. And I have to say that plagiarism was pretty bad. And and my sense was that this wasn't regarded as quite as big a sin in whatever country they came from. And they were not all from China. Some of them were Malaysia, or, or Hong Kong or whatever. But I had the feeling that this was considered kind of normal to uh, to take, to quote without quotation marks, things that you got from books when writing a term paper or something. Is that fair, or am I going really?
I'm not so sure that would be considered normal or common in China. My explanation and understanding is that, and this is more now, I don't know when you were teaching these students, Meta, but in any case, there is incredible pressure among students in China to be able to get into university and to get into good universities. Mm-hmm. And they write an extremely high stakes exam at the end of secondary school. And when parents have any money whatsoever, and if it looks like their child might not do well on that examination and get into a good university, they will send them abroad for an education. Mm-hmm. And there is incredible pressure on those young people to do well. Mm-hmm. And because of that pressure, and they maybe come from families that have scraped and saved together every single piece of money that they need to send their kids abroad, made great sacrifices. Mm. And that pressure, I think, perhaps contributes to doing things that really ought not to be done, plagiarizing, because of the pressure they feel. And with the one-child policy, they would be the only, I know that doesn't exist now, but these students that you taught probably were a part of that generation, and they were the only child, and there was such great hopes put on them because the family had sacrificed everything. Mm-hmm. I think that might help to explain a bit more. Does it condone what they did? No, but I think it helps to understand that context in which they've come to a place like Canada to get an education.
Well, I'm only saying that it may have been normal there because I had friends who taught in Hong Kong, for example, who told me that was, that the students would walk up and down memorizing texts from the textbook, yeah, so that they could repeat it word for word on an exam. And that's not plagiarism exactly. It's, I don't know what to call it, but it's not critical thinking. That's for darn sure. And I don't know. I don't want to make a story of this. I think, in fact, I should just be quiet because it, But I do want to inquire into the what I would see as a very desirable thing to integrate the scholarship of the whole world so that we read sound, good research reports from other countries, maybe not as much as they read ours, but a lot more than I think we do. And that's not just in order to stop being, imperialistic or domineering in our culture, but also just because science ought to be worldwide and integrated, and all kinds of knowledge should be shared globally, I think.
I agree with you, but I just think and Leon used the word asymmetrical. I think that's the world we live in, mm-hmm, and the power, how English is the global lingua franca, like it or not. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, it is valued more and people publish in English, and that really limits our understanding of knowledge and research outside of the English speaking and writing world. And that's a problem for the reasons that you noted, Meta.
Mm-hmm. Of course, these people do come, like Indians, I think, are very strongly represented in Silicon Valley. The researchers there doing AI are, very, very keen to get visa permission for them, for Indians in particular, to come to the U.S. and work there, because they're just really good researchers.
But English is the medium of instruction in Indian higher education, so they would be completely fluent in English if they got their education in India. And if they didn't, they probably got their higher education in an English-speaking university.
Okay.
Meta, do we want to talk about international students and some of the challenges in North America? Is that something you'd like to?
Yes.
So I don't know what the listeners or you, Meta or Leon, know, but there's been in Canada and in the US increasing restrictions on international students, whether that's restrictions on their freedom of speech, we see that more in the US, or restrictions on getting visas or visas being issued to international students. In Canada, the permits have dropped over 40% since 2023, and that has had a very negative impact on both universities and community colleges that have had significant numbers of international students who pay higher tuition fees than domestic students. And I think this is a big, you could say, a crisis in higher education right now, and maybe something we could have a conversation about.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't really understand what the motive of the government is. Is this just part of the whole, right-wing movement of not liking migrants or immigrants, and so we take it out on even students visiting temporarily? Or what's behind this trend?
Well, we have to distinguish between what's going on south of the border and what's going on in Canada. And I'll speak about Ontario specifically to begin with. People talk about an affordable housing crisis in Ontario, and it's always easy if governments have a target, somebody or some group to blame, and that group has been international students. The logic behind the argument is that international students have taken up the affordable housing in communities like London, Ontario, where I live, and therefore there is less affordable housing for Canadians. And as a result of that, the Liberal government, the federal Liberal government, started to restrict the number of visas for international students coming to Canada. And I think that's also a part of the government appealing to a right-wing population that wants to blame the other, immigrants, people from countries outside of Canada. And so in a nod to right-wing populism, the federal government restricted the visas. And for example, in London, Ontario, where I live, we have a college called Fanshawe College, and it just laid off 30% of its faculty. 30% of its faculty was laid off this year because they don't have the tuition money from international students that they once did. In the US, it's a little bit different with Trump and an anti-immigrant agenda that we see manifest in all kinds of ways, and particularly an agenda that is against students from the Middle East coming to the United States. So there's fewer visas. The irony of all of this is in some ways other countries are benefiting because those students who once would have gone to study in the US are now going to Japan, to Korea, to China, to Taiwan, and doing their degrees in English and getting funding for that. So
is Canada doing this on anything like the same scale as the U.S.?
I think the U.S., because of the size of the U.S. and the number of universities that they have there, has restricted more students numerically, but proportionally I'm not sure that's the case. There's also been increasing restrictions on Chinese students to the US because of geopolitics again. We're talking about ideology and China being viewed, as an enemy, and therefore not trusting Chinese students and even Chinese faculty in the work that they do.
Well, that's interesting too. That there are a few cases that hit the news, and maybe there are others that we don't know about, where Chinese faculty, or they not necessarily just professors, but could be researchers, are expelled on suspicion of stealing information, and I would hope that most scientific information should be open anyway, and we would encourage everybody to learn as much as they could. But apparently, a lot of information going on knowledge being generated in universities is now secret, which I'm not sure I like that idea.
Yeah, and I just read a study myself about faculty in Canada of Chinese descent. So they're not Chinese nationals, but they're of Chinese descent. Many of whom have research partnerships with colleagues in China, and their work is increasingly surveyed and restricted because of what you just talked about, a fear of our state that there will be so-called secrets shared with the Chinese state through these research partnerships and collaborations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think of a university as a place where everything should be open, virtually everything. I suppose not the kind of virus research that would enable somebody to come up with a way of killing everybody in the world, but most knowledge should be public, open for the public to hear. And in fact, the whole name of the game is to try to get the knowledge out there and to get other people to be aware of what new ideas and information has been generated. The world is going to be changing so much as a result of AI. And I don't know to what extent that's going to affect, or has anybody even been thinking about, the impact of AI education on the internationalization of education. Is it, are we going to become more parochial again, or what?
Well, I don't know a lot about it, but I did read about AI being used to track international students in the United States who have expressed views in support of Palestinians, and particularly around the war in Gaza. And then with that data that is collected through AI, those students' visas have been revoked. So there is a crackdown on any students who speak out in support of Gaza and Palestinians in general. And it's been used to limit free speech, and they talk about catch and release, just taking students and sending them back to their home countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, but I was thinking about the impact of AI on higher education, or any education, because we hear that one of the great advantages of it is that it can provide tutoring to students individually, and that the effectiveness of AI education can be really superior, and students can learn a lot more quicker than they would have in a regular classroom or in regular universities. And that not only research, but university teaching, as well as lower education or level education, will be greatly changed by the development of platforms that interact with the students individually and see where they're not following a particular problem or answer, and helping them, individually. So I think that we're going to see changes and impacts on university education as a system, but I don't know whether people yet are fully aware of how much that impact is going to be or what it's going to look like. And maybe it's not even showing up at all yet.
I think it is, and I think when you talk about plagiarism, when you taught the students in the past, I think AI takes it up a whole notch, where you could have AI write entire papers,
Oh, yeah.
and do all the work. I think for me, the biggest shift in this realm has been online learning, and we certainly saw that with the pandemic, and increasingly universities are offering entire degrees online, and a student could be anywhere in the world and get a degree from a university in Pennsylvania or wherever. And there are also something called MOOCs. I don't know if you've heard of those, MOOCs, massive open online courses. Some are free.
Actually, I taught one.
Okay.
I created, in a way, I created a program and Udemy on how to be a climate change influencer.
Great.
So yeah, I've enrolled, but like everybody else, I enroll and then I take one or two of the lessons and drop it. So the dropout rate is something like 95%, I think, for most of these courses. People
So that's an example of internationalization of higher education. It's learning across borders.
uh-huh.
Yeah, and I would say it's very positive side of it, definitely, because with AI, it isn't clear how it can influence, I would say, internationalization. Probably not negative, but it's unclear how it can influence. Maybe there are some positive things because it's much easier to deal with various languages.
I mean, my assumption is that the effect would be, in a way, similar to the effect of attending by mail or anything else where you don't actually interact with other students. I think certainly a significant part of the value of education is simply getting to know your other students and talk with them and share ideas, so that if you don't get to know each other informally, there must be some loss that way. I have a good woman friend who is a young woman, is now enrolled in a program to become a psychotherapist, and she does it online. Now, I don't know. I mean, you certainly can do a lot of therapy online, but how much can you get that way, and how much, how good a program can something like that be? Has anybody done any significant Marianne research to compare the quality of education that people are getting if they take an online course or something of that kind?
Yeah, well, I think you certainly can engage with other people in an online course. And in fact, the best instructors would set up opportunities within an online course or program for that to happen. Mm-hmm. And there is research that shows that there can be a lot of learning, good learning, engaged learning in an online format, and there can be poor learning in a face-to-face format. So it really depends on the pedagogy, the instructor, the techniques they use, and all those things can be done online and face-to-face. It's just a different format for learning.
I think I deflected you from telling us more about the situation of young foreign students in Canada. What are they doing? How are they coping? What are the alternatives available to them? And are they making use of this, or are they simply packing up and going home
I don't have any research or know of any myself. In the case of the international students in community colleges, a community college like Fanshawe in London, Ontario is continuing to offer the program they're in until they graduate, but they are closing programs that were highly subscribed by international students because of the visa restrictions that the federal government has enacted. So, yeah.
Well, okay. I'm worried about how they're coping. For example, I have a friend whose daughter is in the U.S. and she came on a visa from Russia, but she can't leave the country now. She can't go home to visit her family this summer, or wasn't able to because she wouldn't be able to get back in. So I think as long as she stays in the U.S., she's probably all right, at least for the time being. But she can't leave, and so that has to create real problems for the students. And I just wonder how they're doing with that. I'm also curious about whether there is any kind of organized resistance to this trend, both in Canada, the U.S., and probably other countries, um, that to limit or reduce the number of foreign students who are admitted. Is there any? I know Harvard is trying to fight back, but apparently even they're weakening because Trump can strangle off their future grants for research and so on. So I'm just wondering how to fight back on this and whether any professional associations like the Canadian Association of University Teachers or so on, are any of these organizations combating this trend?
I don't know them, but again, to go back to history, the reason that many universities and colleges in Canada started to recruit and bring in increasing numbers of international students is because of public funding cutbacks to higher education. So as we've seen funding from the province in Ontario, for example, decrease and not keep up with inflation over the last 25, 30 years, universities and colleges have turned to international students to make up the cash difference that they used to get from the government. Mm-hmm. And that now that we have a restriction on international students, that has proven to be extremely difficult for universities and colleges in Canada. And so I think that they would have to advocate for appropriate funding or to allow international students to come here again. And there's so much value in international students above and beyond the economic value. They not only pay tuition, but they contribute economically to our communities and work. And in some cases, they get PR status and then continue to contribute to Canada economically. But there's a really big social, cultural advantage to having international students on campus. Mm-hmm. It benefits domestic students. They bring their cultural knowledge and background and expertise. And I think returning to what we talked about at the beginning, international education in its best manifestation is about learning about difference and engaging with the world. And we're all better for that. And that's, I think, a good reason for us to advocate and fight for international students to still be able to come here or study abroad.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
It's, of course, very hard to develop any, I would say, good strategy to mitigate this. One of the way of doing it's a kind of support inside research and educational community. For example, as far as I know, University of Toronto has an agreement with Harvard University, maybe informal, I don't know, that some of the students who cannot stay in Harvard can move to Toronto and to finish their studies there here.
And would degree from Harvard or would their degree?
I don't know details.
That's happened.
Yeah.
And U of T has scooped up not only international students whose visas have been revoked in the U.S., but faculty that are don't want to work under a Trump regime, like the Monk School of International Affairs at U of T has recruited a number of faculty from Ivy League universities in the US. So in some ways we're
Canada have some advantage from that, and it's not just only Monk, but other departments as well. So it's a kind of policy to do that. Yeah, but so for both for students and for the faculty. Of course, situation with faculty maybe not so urgent as with students, because as far as I know, nobody remove the faculty, but it's first for the students. So in this sense, yeah, it's
well, there was a trend, or I don't know whether it was a trend, but was a reason for some students to want to come as students, because the idea was that if they're in Canada already and have a degree from a Canadian university, or maybe the same for the US, that they would have a good opportunity to become a permanent immigrant to the country. But then there's, you know, some of the times there's been arguments about the fact that neither the US nor Canada made that automatic or easy, that you, even if you came as a student and graduated, you wouldn't necessarily be allowed to stay. And I don't know whether that's changed or not, but there have been arguments saying that certainly should be almost pro forma, that, you know, if you've come, you've finished your degree, well, of course you can become a Canadian.
Well, there's two sides, there's many sides to every issue. The other side is the home country the student came from may have invested in that student going abroad for an education with the understanding that once they got their education and became a doctor, for example, they would go back and serve their own country. And that's called brain drain. And another term that's used in the literature is brain circulation, that they lose like that capacity of a local person who goes abroad to study and then stays abroad is not going back and you know, giving back to their own country and their own community.
I see your point, and it's certainly a real one. Maybe it's even a stronger case than what I was arguing for. Anyway, our time is up, and we have to say goodbye. But this has been a lot of fun. And thank you very much. And I think other people will also find it interesting, because it's not a topic that gets talked about enough, and it's certainly important. So thank you both, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.